Hello and welcome to the Fancy Scientist podcast. Today's episode was inspired by a former student of mine in the Successful Wildlife Professional program. I had the fantastic opportunity to sit down with Camilla Price to talk about her experience applying for and being awarded the Graduate Research Fellowship Program grant. One day I was on LinkedIn, actually most days I'm on LinkedIn, and I saw an update from her that she was attending graduate school, which I was super excited about because I know she's been trying to get into graduate school for the past few years, but that she was the recipient of a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program grant. That is the NSF GRFP grant. It is a huge honor, a huge deal, because this is a super competitive grant. And when you get this grant, you can pretty much go wherever you want for graduate school. You have your choice. So I reached out to her, offered her congrats, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. I am so happy for you. But I was also so intrigued. I wanted to know how she did it. Like I said, this is a really prestigious grant. I had applied a couple of times, and although I got an honorable mention, I never got the full grant. So I wanted to interview her and ask her about the process that she took. So many of you out there who are interested in going to graduate school are going to learn a ton from this episode. And even if you're not ready to go to graduate school or you're looking to get into a wildlife career, you're definitely going to benefit a lot. If you're not in wildlife careers, you're still going to learn from her approach, because the strategy she used is something that I teach in my Successful Wildlife Professional program, which is you want to start with the end in mind and work backwards. And she uses a lot of the strategies that I teach my students. Make sure you stay tuned until the end of the episode, where I share some additional tips and takeaways to really solidify these points no matter where you are in your career and what you're going for. These tips work. Hi, Camilla. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
So we're here to talk about the National Science Foundation GRFP grant. But first, let's take some time to get to know you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are in your wildlife career, how you got there, and where you see yourself going.
Sure. So I'm an early career conservationist, and very excitingly, I'll be starting graduate school soon, which we'll get into. But my background is in wildlife conservation and science communication, and I'm particularly drawn to applied work that involves human-wildlife coexistence, everything from urban wildlife to preventing livestock depredations to how can we protect and restore endangered species. So I graduated from Texas Christian University 2 years ago in the biology department and minored in journalism, because I feel it's really important to combine those disciplines for a positive conservation outcome. And since then, I've been doing field and policy positions for the past 2 years in different parts of the country, which has been a really great experience. So I feel like that has really built up my skill set as well. So I'm really excited to be taking this next step, and I eventually want to be in more of a conservation management role where I'm helping with both the research and the communication and engagement aspects of an applied conservation project, something like building a wildlife crossing or restoring a native species.
Great. And you have a really strong background in writing and communications, because you have a newspaper or newsroom, news magazine. I'm not sure if it was a print, but your digital newspaper background. So Camilla was one of my students in the Successful Wildlife Professional. And for a while, you were deciding what path to go down if you wanted to do research or communications. Can you tell people about that background just so they get to know you better and just see the diversity of experience that you have?
Sure. So I joined SWP in part because I wanted to get better at getting positions, which I did, but also because I wanted a little more direction. Because I knew that I had always loved writing and wanted for that to be incorporated somehow into whatever position I ended up in. But a lot of the wildlife introductory positions that I had done were very fieldwork forward. And I wasn't sure that that was the right fit for me. And so I wasn't sure what opportunities would be available if I decided to go the wildlife route. And so I was talking to Stephanie about, should I be looking for more media forward positions like working for Manga Bay, or should I be looking for more of a wildlife focused position? And truthfully, I've applied for a lot of both, and I've been more successful with the wildlife forward position. So that has taken my trajectory in a bit of a direction. But I've really enjoyed all the media positions that I've done. So Stephanie mentioned I've worked for, when I was in college, the editorial magazine and the student newspaper. And then since graduating, I've done some freelance work where I've written for some local outlets and created social media content for nonprofits. So I do want communications to be incorporated regardless of my next position into what that is. That's something that I really value, and it's something that is necessary now for people to succeed, when you have to be able to communicate why your position is important and why your research matters. And so I see it now less of a binary and more of an and, although I would definitely still be open to an environmental communication position. I'm now looking more toward an interdisciplinary position.
Yeah, and even if you decide to go the straight research route, writing is such an important part of the job. If you're going academically or in government or nonprofits, obviously with academically, you're writing research papers. And there's a lot of overlap between journalism and writing research papers. I don't know if you've had that experience yet, but it's similar experiences writing grants where you should avoid flowery language and just like get to the facts, explain things concisely. So being a good writer is going to help you in a research career as well.
Absolutely.
So how did you discover the Graduate Research Fellowship Program? When did you first hear about it? I applied for it when I was in graduate school, but I found out about it in graduate school. So how did you find out about it? And why don't you tell people a little bit about what it is?
Sure. So I had been looking for funded graduate positions since graduating from undergrad, and I would see them posted on places like the TAMU job board and start applying, but they're extremely competitive. And so I knew that if I was going to get a position that was a really good fit for me, I might have to look elsewhere, go to a program that had some alternate funding. And I came across the GRFP and kind of set it on the back burner. I thought, I'll get to that if I need it. And I was in a position this fall where I had some time to work on applications, and I pulled back up the GRFP and thought, this is the right time, because I had gotten very close with some funded positions where I had been one of the final 2 or 3 candidates and hadn't received it. And so I knew that I was able to enter a graduate program, that I was competitive for them, but I wanted to potentially bring my own funding because so many labs even were closed if you didn't have your own funding. And that's what the GRFP does, is it's a grant that funds not a specific research project, but funds the student, no matter where you go or what you work on. And you have 3 years of funding spread across up to 5 years to work on a research project of your choice at the institution of your choice, basically, as long as it's in the US and sometimes Canada.
Well,
And so
I went to Canada. That's pretty cool.
I didn't know that either until I started really looking into it. And so I was actually, according to the official timelines, a little behind the curve, because most people, well, first of all, most of them work with their advisor on a pre-existing project to come up with this idea and application. And then they start working on it and writing it in July. And I was pulling up the website in like early September. But the application is due in October. You find out in April. But I thought, I can do this. I can handle it. And so the 2 major components, you need recommendation letters and transcripts, but that's fairly basic. So the 2 major components of the NSF are, you have a personal statement where you say why you're a good researcher, why you're a good candidate for the grant, and the research proposal, where you have an idea that you share, where you've done the literature review and methodology and everything. And you're not necessarily held to that. Like, you get the grant, you don't have to do exactly what you proposed, but it shows them that you know what you're doing in terms of scientific literacy. And so those were the two main things that I had to work on going into it.
So, okay, so then you decided like, okay, I'm going to work on this grant and now is the time. And you can choose to work on anything you want in the world, literally. It's really a challenge. I mean, like when I was starting out, even though I was in graduate school and I had an advisor, I did have a lot of leeway in terms of what I could write because my advisor is like, you can pretty much study anything as long as it falls under the umbrella of genetics, which is like, pretty much anything because like everything has genetics. So I found it so difficult to choose a topic. How did you decide what you were going to conduct a study on?
So NSF funds a broad discipline of science fields, and the one that's closest to mine is the ecology field. And so I knew that it had to, connect into that subfield based on my own expertise. First, like I said, I'm interested in applied conservation, and where I was working at the time was the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, and they have an ongoing project related to swift fox restoration in the West. And I thought, that's a really cool project. There are people that I know who are working on it. Perhaps I could do something related to the human dimensions of that project. So the attitudes of people in that area toward the swift fox range expansion and reintroductions and everything like that. And I brought it to my boss's boss, my supervisor, and said, what do you think? We talked through the idea a bit. I did a literature review and found that actually there had basically been a paper that did exactly what I wanted to do and thought, well, drat. So then I had to pivot. And I had been reading about how Colorado had voted to reintroduce wolverines to the state, which is such an interesting topic, an interesting choice because, they're a much lesser known carnivore. They're the largest mustelid, so they're in the weasel family. They really kind of keep to themselves. They're usually away from people up in the mountains. And so a lot of people don't even know what a wolverine is. And so I thought there could be something there where if they're going to be working soon on reintroducing the wolverine, how do people feel about it? Do they even know what a wolverine is? I started looking into, Colorado Parks and Wildlife's plan and doing a literature review, and I found that nobody had done a study on how people felt about wolverine reintroductions or really the social side of wolverine studies at all in
Anywhere,
the US.
like anywhere in the world.
And there have been a couple in Europe where they asked people at zoos and then I think one in Canada about it for indigenous people, but nothing in the US about attitudes toward wolverines at all. And so I thought, okay, we have something here because it's novel and it could apply not just toward this study system, but, if anyone decided to reintroduce wolverines, they could use whatever research I come up with here. And Colorado Parks and Wildlife had already essentially been committed to restoring this species. And so there would be built-in resources, built-in staff, so I wouldn't be building a project from the ground up. So that project really appealed to me because I liked that it could have a direct and not immediate, but soon impact on an area where I could potentially be studying. So I did a ton of research. I had 80 pages of a Google Doc where I had broken it all out into the literature that I'd found and what I thought was significant for the study. But really, that's how the topic came out.
Wow, that's great. And for those of you out there, what's really important for NSF grants in general is you do want to have a specific research project in a specific topic, but it also has to apply to other species and other areas of the country. So what Camilla did, she probably wrote it in a way that even though it's very specific to this area and wolverines, that the concepts carry across species and across regions. And maybe did you propose new kinds of data analysis or new kinds of questions or things like that? You talked about the novel idea behind it. Did you include anything like that in your proposal?
Right. So the methodology was not necessarily novel, although I did build on some existing frameworks, again, from outside the US. But what Stephanie is talking about is the broader impact section, where you have to say what your proposal is, but then you have to say why it matters. And so I talked about how, this would give us insight into a species that we don't know a lot about, but it could also apply to restoring carnivores around the world, understanding what questions to ask and how people feel about a species that can apply to any kind of study related to carnivores. And so that's where that came in. And, by doing the work beforehand, you're building trust with the community, you're establishing sources of information so that people have somewhere to turn to if they have questions. And that's also critical, as having a framework for the community to turn to. And so for my methodology, I had two pieces. I had an ecology piece where there were existing habitat models for wolverines in the West, and I wanted to add a climate change predictor to see how that would affect the wolverine habitat range, because they're very dependent on snowmelt for things like digging their dens and caching food, things like that. And so I wanted to see how that habitat may shift over time. And I overlapped that with, I surveyed, theoretically, residents and ranchers within 50 kilometers of the suitable habitat for wolverines in Colorado, and asked them about their existing knowledge and values and understanding of wolverines, and everything from how would you feel if you saw a wolverine to, do you feel threatened by wolverines? And some people would be given advanced knowledge about wolverines and some wouldn't, just to assess where people were in their wolverine knowledge journey. And that would be basically modeled out into an acceptance model of where do people feel that they could accept wolverines in this area. So theoretically, I would overlap the suitability model for habitat with the suitability model for acceptance and see where are the ideal reintroduction sites for wolverines. In Switzerland, where they did this for wolves, and there was a similar project in Colorado for wolves. It didn't quite involve the same methodology, but it was similar enough that it was equatable. And so those were two very helpful pieces. But for wolverines, this was all new. And so I was really excited about it. I've talked to Colorado Parks and Wildlife biologists since then, and it's not going to look exactly the way I proposed it, but I'm still going to do some aspect of the Wolverine project, especially on the social science side, where people just don't know as much about them, and there's some work going on to basically prepare for the potential reintroduction.
Great. And I really should commend you, because you talked about how you were applying for graduate research assistantships that were on websites posted as like a job listing almost. And you were talking about how competitive that those were. For those of you guys who don't know this grant, this is extremely competitive. This, and not any NSF grant is really competitive. So this is a huge accomplishment, and especially on your first try. That is really impressive. You're allowed to try, I think I was allowed to try 3 times. Once before I went, or maybe I just did it twice. Once before I went, and then like once you start graduate school, you have a year where you can try. So maybe I just did it twice. But the first year they give you feedback so you can improve it. So she had no feedback. This was an idea that she had. And then also without the direction of an advisor. That is also remarkable. And I know that you mentioned you had help, but if you've never done anything like this before, it's really hard to know like what they want. So can you tell us about your process? Like, how did you know what to put in the grant? How did you know like how to write your personal statement, your research proposal? What was your process for that?
So NSF actually has some great materials. They have this gigantic document that lays out all the instructions, everything from what font you should use to, what should be included in the personal statement. And it's definitely worth reading that all the way through and attending. They have a couple of introductory webinars about the grant. But I also they have a list of previous winners on the site. And so I emailed a bunch of ecology students who had successfully received the award and said, please help. I said, I have these drafts. Would you read them and tell me what you think went well, what you think I could improve on? Does this make sense? And I asked some of them to send me examples of what they had done. And so I was very blessed to have some students who very generously donated their time and their examples.
Wow.
So I could see what to build off, what NSF would be looking for. And so like the idea was mine and the writing was mine, but I had a lot of help in terms of constructing what the proposals even should look like, because there's a very specific format and style. for your personal statement, you're supposed to talk about your accomplishments, but also build in those soft skills, show examples of your resilience or your leadership. And you're supposed to have a kind of a hook in the beginning. And so I talked about how starting at the Dallas Zoo, volunteering there was a huge piece of my conservation journey as a teenager, getting exposed to working on applied conservation projects and helping local community. And then being able to pay my experience forward would mean so much to me. There's a broader impacts in the personal section as well. So you're supposed to talk about my research will be meaningful, but also I intend to mentor other students and help them get to conferences and pay them a living wage and things that are significant to you as someone in your respective field. So I definitely solicit a lot of help from that. And then you need 3 recommendation letters. So I asked pretty early for those. One from a research professor that I had worked with, one from a master's student I had helped on that project, and then one from a professor who knew me more for my environmental writing background, just to get a little more diversity in there. And so being able to get feedback on even my compressed timeline made a big difference. So that was really helpful.
Yeah. And from NSF's perspective, like the point of this grant is they're investing in a person for their career trajectory. So it's not like, yes, the proposal has a lot of impact, but they want to see who you are as a person. And I'm sure your strong communication background helped you as well, just in terms of they want to invest in somebody who's an excellent communicator, because as we've seen in recent times, there's so much trust that's been lost in scientists. And, scientists have been really great at the research, but not so good on the communication skills. So they want to invest in the person as well. I'm a little bit, I don't know if taken aback is the right word, but I love that you asked for help, because I did something similar. I reached out to people and I asked them for their proposals. I mean, I was like, I'm not going to obviously copy your proposal, but I want to know like what the style is and like what led to success. So I did get a lot of examples, and that was really helpful, but I never thought to ask them for help. So that is awesome that you did that. And just to everyone out there, like people are so worried about like bothering people, or I know this is not technically networking, but I think another fear of networking is that people are going to be seen as like annoying and kind of like blacklisted. And unless you're like, really emailing somebody all the time, but if you email somebody once, twice, they're not even going to remember your name. They're not going to associate you with that. So that's awesome that you did that. And it's also great to hear that there's kind people in the world who are interested in paying it forward. And maybe they had help too. Like maybe they had lab mates who got it before and were willing to help. So I love that. And then you'll probably help people in the future when people email you.
Absolutely. I would love the chance. I'm honestly so honored to have received the grant. I didn't expect it. I had a friend who was applying in another field. Her field is neuroscience. And so she was checking the portal every day. And one day I woke up and she had texted me and said, "You got the GRFP." So she said, or I did. So then I had, a very constrained timeline to figure out, okay, where the heck am I going and what am I going to be doing and everything like that. But it was all good. It's a blessed experience to be able to.
Yeah, good problem to have.
Get to go to graduate school, which had been a long time goal of mine, develop those project design and leadership skills and more of those like in-depth connections. So I'm really excited.
And this is for a PhD, right? It's only for, do they do it for masters too?
They do. So I don't have my PhD and I'm not sure that I'm going to. So this is actually for my master's degree.
Okay.
So I will be.
Yeah, I think when we were applying, I think the master's was newer, but go ahead. Okay, so for your master's. Okay, great.
Yeah, and apparently it has changed a bit, but now for master's or a PhD, you can get 3 years of funding to do your research project. And so I'll be starting a master's in ecology program at Colorado State this fall, which I'm really looking forward to. I had reached out to a couple of professors that I knew had labs that were interesting to me, and a couple of labs that I had corresponded to about my NSF grant specifically because they had a really strong wolverine research program. And Colorado State was the best fit for my interests because they have a center dedicated to human carnivore coexistence. And so there was a very broad faculty community of people who knew what they were doing about this topic and had a lot of expertise and connections and things like that.
So once you got the grant, then you reached out to these people. These weren't professors that you'd reached out to previously before securing the funding.
Some of them I had reached out to just by doing MS inquiries. And so I built on those emails to create my update email. So writing cover letters like you learn in Stephanie's course or writing your MS inquiry emails can definitely help with writing an email to say, hey, I have this grant. Do you have a spot for me? Because that's essentially what I did is I wrote to 8 professors. That's too many. Don't do that. And said, I have this experience. I have this grant. I saw that your lab works on XYZ. Can we chat? And I got to talk with all of them, which was a wonderful experience. And it would have been a great experience in any of those labs. But Colorado State ended up being the winner. And I also talked to a whole bunch of their students, which really helped in terms of knowing what the lab is like, what the housing in the area is like, all of those other details.
So it kind of flipped the script where like they wanted you. They were trying to get you.
Yes, it was a very different experience being the one who was wanted to come to the university as opposed to, being one of 400 applicants for a master's position where your name is just a block on the screen.
Yeah.
So
even with that, I do want to reassure people that it can be that if your application is competitive, it's not that they don't want you, but it's like, oh, somebody else was just a slightly better fit. And if like that person had not applied, then you would have gotten that position. So may I ask who you decided on going with?
So I'll be co-advised by Dr. Veronica Jovovich in the Fish Wildlife Conservation Biology Department and Dr. John Salerno in the Human Dimensions of Natural Resources Department. So it has that dual interdisciplinary setup. And so I'm really looking forward to it. I had reached out to the director of the center, who's also a professor, Kevin Crooks, and he connected me with Veronica and John. It really has worked out.
I was just curious because I worked on elephants for my PhD, and I know George Whittemire is at Colorado State, and I know he does some local species. I think he was doing deer work, though. I can't remember. But most of his work was on elephants, but I was just wondering if it was George.
I know of George, and his work is really interesting, so I look forward to hopefully running into him on campus.
In the beginning, you mentioned you're not held to the research. Like you can write a proposal and then can you like completely change your research? Do you know? Like, is that okay with NSF?
You have to be within your main field. So I couldn't decide that I wanted to take this grant and go do computer science.
Right. Yeah.
You can adjust your subfield. So initially, I was in the life sciences category and then I was under other because I knew that my research was really interdisciplinary. So I had like one subfield in social science and one in ecology. When I got the grant and figured out where I was going, your master's degree, whatever the name of it is, should correspond to your subfield for NSF. And so I changed my subfield to ecology, but still under life sciences. And so you're not held to your project, but I am really interested in this project. Always propose research that's at least related to what you want to do. And so I will be working on like the aspect of the wolverine project, and then also another project that's completely unrelated to the wolverines, but matches those same concepts of human-wildlife coexistence and community ecology. So I'm really excited about both those projects, and I think they'll have different strengths because the other project that I'm involved with, I'll be based in the US, but it's an international project. I'll be using data from Africa.
Cool. That's exciting. Yeah, so theoretically, if someone out there wrote a proposal for something, but their dream was to always study gorillas or, I don't know, some like really charismatic species that's more competitive, they could take their proposal and find a professor that works with the species that they really want to study and change their proposal.
Absolutely.
I've always wondered that because I knew you could change your project, but I was just wondering how much.
As long as you're in the theme, right? Yeah. Then it works.
So you said you didn't think you were going to get it, and the odds for anyone are not in your favor. how would you have felt, or what would you have thought if you didn't get it this year? Like, what was your strategy for next steps?
I'm not sure whether I would have applied again or whether I would have gone on looking for other positions because at the time that I was applying for NSF, I was applying for seasonal positions, grad positions, and permanent positions. I really didn't care what I did next as long as it connected to my interests.
Mhm.
And so I knew there was a position that was going to come out in April, a permanent position that was based in Grand Teton, where I had had a really fantastic internship experience. And so I was planning to apply for that. I was planning to, after the summer position that I was going to be doing, I was planning to, continue applying for other master's positions that popped up that might also start in the fall. And so I didn't have a set backup plan, but it was in progress because I was actively applying for things. But I knew that I at some point wanted to go to grad school, even if it wasn't this upcoming fall, because I wanted to develop myself as a researcher and build my portfolio, basically. So it really worked out because, NSF is very prestigious, but also the grant funding has been cut dramatically. So this year, they awarded half as many grants as they usually do. And so a lot of deserving people didn't get an award. And so it would not have hurt my feelings if I didn't receive one. But I was very fortunate to do so, and I accepted and am going to wholeheartedly work on that research.
One of the things that I learned from applying to NSF grants later on is that it's important to talk to the program officers. They have representatives for the different grants. Did you employ that strategy, and was that helpful for you?
So I didn't talk to my program officer until I decided on Colorado State because there's not a whole lot of point in connecting with them if you're not going to go there. But I will say that, like I said, I had connected with a couple of professors who were doing relevant work before I heard the results. So there was one professor at Rhode Island who was doing research on wolverines, and she actually gave a talk at the Smithsonian. And I connected with her after and said I'd be interested potentially if any opportunities in her lab came up and shared with her my proposal. And I also got to attend the Wildlife Society conference that fall and talked to the basically graduate coordinator for the University of Montana, which also has a very strong wolverine program. I just talked to him about my background and asked him about what opportunities there might be at Montana. And a lot of the people that I talked to, both this year and in previous years, said, talk to us when you can bring funding, that any admittance of mine would be contingent on bringing funding of my own. And so I followed up with them in April and, had really great conversations with them. And Montana and Rhode Island were high up on my list in terms of if I didn't choose Colorado State. But I ultimately went a different direction just because I had enough flexibility and I could basically choose between my options. It's very full circle for me. So when I was considering undergrad, Colorado State was the other school that I was considering.
Mhm.
And it came down between them and TCU. And so now I get to have the best of both.
That's great. Okay, before we wrap up, do you have any other final tips or suggestions that we didn't go over for the NSF grant or just even approaching this career and being in this career?
Right. For NSF, I mean, we've hit on some of them, like, doing your homework and asking for help is huge. I would say that just apply, just give it a shot, because even if you don't get it, you could get an honorable mention, which actually in some states is valid as a GRFP, or you could just basically have a research proposal idea that you like, and then you can take that to professors and say, here's an example proposal I wrote that fits with your lab. Would you be interested? And so NSF can open doors for you, even if you don't get the grant. And overall, just in the career, I mean, I'm very early in my career, but I've been very fortunate to have some really wonderful experiences. And so I think getting out and exploring and doing things that interest you is fantastic. I think that every experience teaches you something about what you do or don't want to do, and it's okay to change your plan.
Mhm. I do have one final question. Do you have any idea how much time it took you to write the grant? Like, did you track your
So
time or do you have an estimate?
I didn't track my time. I worked on it pretty much every day for September into October. And my computer was having difficulties at the time, so I would go into my office in the Smithsonian in the evenings and when no one else was there and work on my NSF GRFP. And I would talk to my roommates and they'd be like, "Oh, you're still working on the Wolverine thing." It's like, "Yes, I'm still working on the Wolverine thing." But it was worth it because all the investment paid off.
Yeah. And then the other advantage you didn't mention is that you can apply again next year if like
Yes.
grad school is really on your radar, and then you'll have the feedback to integrate and make it better and share with more people. And maybe in that amount of time, say you get another research experience, an internship, you have a new advisor who can give you some feedback and some help. So that's another helpful tip, and you'll have had the experience. It's really rare for people to get grants on their first try. So this is really remarkable. And one advisor told me basically like the first step to getting a grant is getting rejected. Like that's like the first. So you bypassed the first step. You're on to step two.
I do feel like I learned a lot from being
Yeah.
rejected from master's positions because,
Yeah.
they said, "You're so close. We want you to have a little more experience in this." And so knowing what traits in my interview had made me especially marketable and knowing how to reach out to professors, cold emailing,
Mhm.
those were really helpful skills. And so also just seeing what's out there. Like I would not, unless you have a very clear idea and possibly some external support of what you want to do, I maybe wouldn't apply for it right out of undergrad. Go explore a bit, see what
I
you do and
agree.
don't like, see what kind of research you're interested in before you apply for it. Because I'm 2 years out of undergrad, and that has helped a lot in terms of knowing even what study site I wanted to work in. Because I found out from working in Washington and Wyoming that I love the West. And so being able to work on an endangered species in the West was a big highlight for me.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Well, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I learned so much. I know people out there are going to learn from you. And congratulations once again. This is such a prestigious honor. And I'm so excited to see what's to come from you and to learn about wolverines. I follow you on LinkedIn, obviously. So I'm excited for all the. Are you doing camera trap stuff at all?
So I will be for the other part of my project.
Uh-huh.
So not so much for wolverines, but I'll have camera trap data from Africa to understand like what makes predators more likely to enter areas with people and livestock. So camera trapping has definitely been a big part of my experience. Stephanie asked that probably because we both worked with the Smithsonian, which has a huge camera trap project that I was in.
Yeah. And wolverines are pretty elusive animals too, but hopefully you'll get to see one.
Yes, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. If I could, that'd be like a life-changing experience.
Yeah, start visualizing it now so then it happens. Attract the Wolverine.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm so excited to see what is to come from your research.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was great to talk with you today.
You too. I want to reiterate some things that Camilla mentioned and really drill them home because these are the tips and takeaways that lead to success. First, I want to say though, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned a lot, please share this episode to help people who are applying for the GRFP grant, help them strategize whatever they are going through, and also to rate and review this podcast. When you do that, it helps other people find it and we're able to spread the knowledge and help people out. Camilla reached out for help and this got her the grant. She mentions that she couldn't have done it if it wasn't for the support of these students. So help other people find this valuable information so that we can be successful in wildlife careers. Camilla was not afraid to reach out and network with people. And this is something that I highly encourage people to do in the Successful Wildlife Professional. When you join, I have a challenge right away getting people to network. In fact, I have have some new students, and one of them started networking with somebody whose career that they're interested in. So even if you're not applying for a grant, what you can do is conduct informational interviews. And in the Successful Wildlife Professional, I teach you to do all of these things step by step, the exact language to use. I love that Camilla was not afraid to take risks, and she asked for help. This is what those informational interviews are. You are asking people for 15 minutes of their time to learn about their wildlife career. So many people are afraid to ask for help, to ask for support, because they are worried about getting a rejection. And that will happen. You'll get people who ignore you. You'll get people who say no. That is totally normal and okay. That's why in the Successful Wildlife Professional, I also build in mindset work so that you have that resiliency. You won't let those setbacks derail you. And you'll find more often than not that they really pay off. Another thing that I loved about Camilla is that she put in the work, and this is so important to succeed at this career. Although she did ask for help, she didn't expect things to be done for her. She did a lot of research, both in terms of reading papers, gathering literature, talking to different people that she worked with to understand what kind of gaps there were in research. She did a lot of things on her own. At the end, she talked about spending hours at night working on the Wolverine project. So don't be afraid to show up, do the work. In addition to asking people for help, you're going to have to take the initiative. Nobody is going to make your dreams happen for you. You have got to do this. That's why if you have not listened to podcast number 99 that I did on Spanx founder, yes, Spanx founder, Sarah Blakely, called Ensuring Your Own Success in Wildlife Careers, make sure you listen to that podcast episode. That's going to be next on your to-do list, because as I mentioned, nobody's going to make your dreams happen for you. And her attitude towards making Spanx happen, making it a success, it wasn't guaranteed. Even when she had it in stores like Neiman Marcus, she paid her friends to purchase the product so that stores would sell out of it. You have to use this same kind of mentality, this same kind of intensity to ensure your success in wildlife careers. So that is going to be the next step for you to do after listening to this podcast. Thank you, Camilla, once again for your tips, for your strategy. Your advice is going to help out so many people, and I know we're going to see amazing things from you in the future. If you want to follow Camilla, I will post her LinkedIn page in the show notes so that you can see what amazing successes she's having in graduate school and beyond.